out. She sold this place. I heard somebody at the ball, and they're selling this place.
How come you still have the keys, man? How come you still have the code?
What are you looking for?
Nothing, Pop. Go back to watching your show.
To give her the key back. Like for us. Terrible man.
I don't know about this. I think maybe we should still run while we got the chance.
No, Ryan, you can't. The police are everywhere. They're going to be at the train stations and the bus stops and the airport.
Wait. I think we're just really going to tick them off. Oh, and the National Guard. You know what I don't get?
I'll be back in a while.
It's your sister.
This card doesn't work. Why can't I get my money out of the machine? When I used it earlier, it was fine.
Maybe you've exceeded the limit for today. May I see your card? I'm sorry, but this doesn't appear to be your card.
Well, it's my father-in-law's, but he asked me to get some cash for him. He needs to go to the store today. Just give it back. I'll try again tomorrow.
I'm sorry, but bank policy is I'm going to need to hold on to this and contact Mr. Franklin. If you'd care to bring him in, I'm sure we can straighten out this whole matter.
I can't believe this.
This woman just tried to commit a crime. By using her father-in-law's ATM card to access money without his knowledge, she was breaking a law which protects elders from financial abuse. This kind of situation happens all too often. Elder financial abuse is a growing problem, and it affects people in communities all across the nation, both large and small. Senior citizens are often targeted for financial exploitation because they are often socially isolated or dependent on others for assistance. Many are easily intimidated or beguiled. One common denominator in financial abuse cases is the presence of a relative, friend, caregiver, or someone in whom the vulnerable adult placed trust and confidence. So, what does this have to do with you? The fact is that many instances of financial abuse can be witnessed by bank employees, quite simply because that's where the money is. Therefore, you may be the first line of defense, and in some cases, the only line of defense in an abuse case. We in the banking industry are clearly in a position to witness suspicious situations, notice unusual transactions, and observe banking activity inconsistent with a customer's usual patterns. You may have witnessed similar situations already.
Hello, Mr. Franklin. This is Wendy Weston with Mountain Bank. Someone claiming to be your daughter-in-law was in the bank this morning wanting to use your ATM card.
Huh? What'd you say? No, I don't think I want her to do that.
But just because we're in a position to witness elder financial exploitation, does it mean we can actually do something about it? Simply put, yes.
All right, well, thank you so much, sir, and you have a very pleasant rest of your day.
What did he say?
Well, I'm not sure he's aware of what's happening. I think I'm going to call Adult Protective Services.
What can they do?
They can look into it and find out if everything is okay. I'd rather APS get involved than leave the poor fella to get ripped off.
Adult Protective Services is charged with offering protection and intervention on behalf of those adults who are unable to protect themselves from harm or neglect. By reporting suspected elder financial abuse to Adult Protective Services or the police, financial institutions provide a key initial step to uncover abuse that might otherwise go unnoticed. In other words, reporting such cases is good customer service. The stories you're about to see are based on real cases. They illustrate some of the many ways in which elders are robbed of their money.
Mrs. Roberts wants me to have power of attorney for her. Can you do that here?
Mrs. Roberts, is that correct? Do you want Miss Simpson here to have power of attorney?
I don't know what you're talking about.
She's not altogether up here, you know. That's why I need to have power of attorney.
Well, actually, we don't do that at this office. One day, an elderly customer, Mrs. Roberts, came into the bank with her caregiver. It looked to me like Mrs. Roberts was very confused. Her caregiver was trying to obtain power of attorney.
be done.
When I told the caregiver that the bank couldn't grant power of attorney and they would need to see a lawyer, she became quite irritated. After some complaining, she took Mrs. Roberts and left the bank. I was really uncomfortable about the situation. It just didn't feel right. So I spoke with my supervisor, and he called the local Adult Protective Services office. They immediately got involved and went to visit Mrs. Roberts by herself at home to see if she understood what was going on. APS determined that Mrs. Roberts was not able to make an informed decision and took steps to protect her. The next day, APS called my supervisor. We also contacted all our other area branches to inform them of the situation. It turns out the caregiver had started going to various branch drive-thrus trying to obtain funds. To say the least, the caregiver was fired and the police were notified. I can't help but think about what could have happened if we hadn't done something about the situation.
As witnessed in this story, the customer could have lost a lot of money if it had not been for the actions taken by the bank employee. And this is a key point. She chose to take action. As illustrated here, it's not the bank's job to investigate these situations. All you need to do is report it to your supervisor whenever you observe something suspicious. As much as possible, get to know your elderly customers and become familiar with their banking habits. This alone could be a great step towards spotting behavior out of the ordinary. And always try to inform a customer of the consequences of their financial transactions, especially if you suspect a financial abuse situation could arise.
You know, this is the first time I've ever won anything this big. Can you believe $75,000? And from a Canadian lottery, no less. I can sure use the money.
Mr. Ken, are you sure that you want to do this? I mean, I've never heard of a lottery where you have to pay them money to get what you win.
Oh, I was a little suspicious at first myself, but the nice young lady on the phone explained that the fee is for the taxes and the exchange. You know, they wanted $5,000, but I told them I only had $3,000.
Okay.
Thank you.
In this particular story, the teller knew that something was wrong, but he couldn't refuse the customer's request. He did, however, go to his supervisor with his concern after the customer left the bank. She contacted the bank's security department, which in turn contacted the customer, explaining their concerns and asking for permission to call Adult Protective Services. After speaking to the Department of Justice, the man was eventually convinced that he'd been duped.
Oh, what a fool I am. But I already sent the check by Federal Express this afternoon.
They got his permission to call Federal Express and put a hold on the delivery. Fortunately, the check had not been delivered. It was returned and the man was spared the loss of money he could not afford to lose. In this case, there was reasonable cause for concern on the part of the bank teller. And instead of ignoring the situation, by reporting his suspicions to his supervisor, he was able to stop the loss of his customer's assets.
Look, I said I need the money, okay? Just give me a cashier's check.
I said cash.
I'm sorry. Will you make that cash, please?
Mrs. Carlson, are you sure you need that much money? That's a lot of cash.
Yes, I really do.
The other day, one of our elderly customers came in accompanied by a couple of rough-looking young men. Mrs. Carlson wanted to withdraw $1,800 from her savings account. The situation made me very nervous. Things didn't look right.
Do you want to take it all out right now?
Just give me the cash, please.
Can you tell me what your relationship to Mrs. Carlson is?
It's none of your business. Why don't you just go ahead and do what she asks?
Mrs. Carlson, this is a little over my limit. I'm going to need my supervisor's approval on this. I'll be right back. Excuse me for a moment.
Based on the training I received, I excused myself and called my supervisor.
Okay, I'll be right over.
Connie, my supervisor, tried to separate Mrs. Carlson from the suspicious characters.
Hello, my name is Connie Johnson. I'm the supervisor here.
Glad to meet you.
I'd like you to come over with me and we can speak about your account.
Are you sure you don't?
They objected, but she insisted.
She's on the account. Thank you.
Suddenly, the two guys turned to leave the branch. When I saw the men make a run for it, I knew they were crooks. I hit the suspicion camera button to get a picture for the police and noted the time and date. As it turns out, Mrs. Carlson said these guys were wanting to be paid for work they claimed to be doing on her roof and gutters. Only she couldn't understand why her roof needed work, since it looked okay to her.
Instances of abuse by perpetrators intimidating an elderly victim to pay for unsolicited work are all too common. As illustrated in this case, by simply separating the customer from the suspected perpetrators, it can often be determined if the situation is legitimate. It needs to be said here that if you're ever concerned for the physical safety of your customer, tell your supervisor immediately and let them determine if the police need to be called in. Most customers will gladly put up with the request for verification if they're conducting a legitimate transaction. In cases like this, it's better to be safe than sorry. Finally, if you have any reason to believe that foul play is involved, having a photographic record could make all the difference in catching the perpetrators. Obviously, every bank or financial institution is going to have different procedures for handling cases like these. The main thing is that you are fully aware of the procedures in place at your bank and that you follow them.
Yes, Mrs. Williams, I'm quite sure. I have your present checking balance at $1,436.27.
Oh, that can't be right. I know my Social Security check should have been deposited just the other day.
Yes, I see that deposit Thursday of last week. However, I also see a check for $2,000 that cleared the next day. Do you recall writing a check for that amount?
I never would have done that. I've been sick and I haven't been out of the house recently.
Sometimes financial exploitation of the elderly can be uncovered in less obvious ways. In this case, the customer's caregiver was intercepting her mail and finding out from her bank statement how much money was available. The caregiver then wrote checks to herself and forged the customer's signature. Fortunately, the customer called in because of the missing statement, and the phone banker followed up by calling Adult Protective Services. Just think what could have happened if the customer was not mentally capable of noticing the missing statement.
I know, but she really wants my name added to her account. She's so old and frail, and she just wants me to be able to help her.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Schulte, but I just can't do that without her written authorization. What is your relationship to Mrs. Pearson?
I'm her grandson. Look, I know this is a little out of the ordinary, but I do have power of attorney for her.
Oh, really? Well, may I see your papers, please?
Wouldn't you know it? I left them at home.
In that case, you're going to have to bring your grandmother into the bank to sign the authorization. I'm sorry.
Look, like I said, she's way too frail to leave the house right now. Can't you just give it to me? I'll have her sign it at home. I'm her live-in caretaker now.
Okay. Here. Have your grandmother sign here and here, and then bring this back to me, okay?
Yes, thank you very much. I'll do just that.
So what might happen if this young man was not telling the truth? In this situation, it would be very easy for someone to get their name on an account. Just think of the consequences. Exercise extra care to confirm that a third party is authorized to act on behalf of a customer. For example, if the customer is not making the request, carefully examine documents proving a court-appointed fiduciary or person acting with power of attorney. And always follow your bank's policies regarding the handling of confidential documents. Obviously, there are many more examples of financial exploitation of the elderly. The important message here is that we, as individuals and institutions who are in a position to observe such abuse, take the proper steps to report it. By doing so, we may be saving the elderly customer from tremendous financial and emotional loss. As a society, we don't always realize the isolation and vulnerability of the elderly, especially those who are reliant on strangers for their well-being. And sadly, there are too many people who are willing to take advantage of anyone whom they can financially exploit. The bottom line is that financial exploitation of the elderly is a crime, and anyone who commits it should pay the time.